the evening for comments and questions as well. I titled this, What's in a Lake Name? Legacy, Legends, and Folklore, because we will be talking about legacy in the name county or Minnesota for that matter. You wonder, you see a Lake Rachel. Well, my name's Rachel and I'm going with it. It's my lake. I mean, it must have been named after me, but don't you kind of wonder how Ahamadu got its name? Or Carlos? I mean, Lake Carlos. And so I just started doing some investigation and I just want to have a lot of fun with it. So there's some folklore in it as well, because is it true or isn't it? So you're going to kind of decide on that too. So one thing we know for sure is we do have a lot of lakes in Douglas County. What we don't know for sure is how they got their names. So obviously this is something that has piqued a few people's interest with a great crowd for tonight. I'm really happy to see all of you here. So my goal is to be informative as well as lighthearted and be enthusiastic about our own lake trivia. So some of the lakes are named for pioneers whose homes adjoined the lakes. Others for friends of pioneers or people from the past. Others for their outlines. Others for Native Americans. Others for trees and animals. We pretty much cover every single way to get a name. In the long run, names connect us to our history, names that highlight our geographic area, and names that inspire a tidbit of legends and folklore. So tonight, just in a nutshell, there are some 375 lakes in Douglas County. We have 20 townships in the county, and you will notice some similarities in township names as well as the lakes that are within the township. 74 of our lakes are 150 acres or more, and all others are 10 acres or more. And so if you put all the acreage together, we have about 65,519 acres of water. Although we don't mention every lake tonight, we will take a casual trip through most of the townships of the county, and again, there are 20 of them. And again, I hope this will be a lighthearted information. Where I got the information is, I gleaned the Douglas County Historical Files, the Historical Society files. I kind of read through some of the history of Douglas and Grant County by Constant Larson. He was one of the first city attorneys. Douglas County, Minnesota Geographic Names, copyright 1920. And I emphasize this because things change. And so as people write, names change, even contours change. Some lakes aren't even in existence anymore. But 1920, this informative book came out, and I took a lot of information from that. Also, another book by Lorraine Larson, who is Constant Larson's daughter. She wrote a book, How the Lakes Were Named, and her copyright is 1965. So I took a lot of her information as well in this presentation. So let's start with some familiar lake names that we all know, and I'm going to start tonight with a few love stories. Now I know there's a few men in the crowd, so bear with me, but some of the lakes in our county have been named after certain gentlemen's first loves or their love life. And so we're going to explore this a little bit. So we all know Lake Agnes. We have Lake Agnes and Henry right here in Alexandria. Well, Agnes is named for the Eastern lady love of William Kincaid. And we know that William Kincaid, along with his brother Alexander, were the first ones that they were surveying the government road, and they stopped here. Their brother George out in Delaware said, well, that sounds like let's go there. So they settled here. But, Agnes was named for the Eastern lady love of William Kincaid. We also know with the Kincaid name that we only have Kincaid Cemetery here in Alexandria. Not a lot's been named after the Kincaids, but they did have some influence on some of the names of the lakes. Okay, we've got William Kincaid. Is there a lake named after William? Anyway, William did not marry he did not name the Lake Agnes after his own lady love. Mrs. Caroline Cook, wife of Charles Cook, who was the merchant pioneer from London, who settled during the Fort Alexandria days, she named Lake Agnes herself. Well, how did she get involved with that, I wonder? Well, we can kind of get into the folklore of that part of it, but anyway, Mrs. Caroline Cook, just to keep things going for William Kincaid, apparently, named Lake Agnes for his lovely lady love. So you kind of wonder, was Caroline a busybody neighbor, or was she playing Cupid? I don't know, you decide. The Cooks, more specifically Caroline, left a legacy of her family. There is also a Lake Cook, or Cook Lake, either way you look at it, in LeGrand Township, which was named in honor of Charles Cook, patriarch of the Cook family. And of course, the Kincaids are given credit for the first settlement of Alexandria. The town name came from the first postmaster, Alexander Kincaid. There's no Lake Kincaid. But there's a Lake Mary, named after Mary Kincaid in Lake Mary Township. It was named for Mary Kincaid, who homesteaded on property adjoining Lake Winona on the land extending to today's Alexandria Airport. Mary was a sister to William and Alexander Kincaid. And interestingly enough, there is no Lake Alexander, but there is a Lake George for their other brother, possibly. We don't know for sure. That too could be debated. More in the Cook family, specifically Caroline. She must have got around a little bit. She must have had quite an influence on the neighborhood and surrounding areas. Again, Caroline was the wife of Charles Cook, the merchant. Lake Henry was named by Caroline Cook for one of their children. And by the way, Henry was a brother to Charlie Cook and Louise Cook, and there are 8 lakes named for them. Lake Charlie, the son of Caroline and Charles, and Lake Louise, another daughter. Resources say that the Cooks all eventually went back to London. However, one daughter/sister stayed, and that was Fanny Cook. You think we have a Lake Fanny? Well, we're going to find out later. Anyway, Fanny Cook stayed behind in Alexandria when her entire family went back to London because she had fallen in love with a tall, slim frontiersman merchant by the name of James Van Dyke. Think there's a Van Dyke Lake?
It's Van Dyke Road.
There's a Van, and that's a very good point because we'll talk about that in a little bit. Van Dyke is given the distinction of Alexandria's first merchant in a few accounts of the history. Another familiar lake within the Alexandria city and township is Lake Winona, named for Winona Douglas James, the first white child born in Alexandria, the daughter of Joseph A. James, a settler who came from Philadelphia in 1858. Lake Winona at the west end of Alexandria, and it extends into LeGrand Township. Now let's talk just a little bit more about love links to lake names. Lake Ida was named by Myron Colony, who was one of the first colonists in the area on that lake. He named the lake for a girlfriend out east. It's been written that he brought the first piano to Alexandria by ox team from St. Paul. It had come on a boat up the Mississippi River to St. Paul. Now it is not known if he sent for or brought Ida to his place on the lake as he did his piano. Maybe she just decided to stay out east. Miltona Township was established in 1867, and the township name came from the lake that had already been named Miltona. The lake was named first. Lake Miltona does occupy more than 1/6 of the township area, and the lake was named for Mrs. Florence Miltona Roadruck, wife of Benjamin, who had homesteaded on the west end of the lake in Leaf Valley. It has been said that Florence washed their clothes in the lake, but the real question I want to pose to you tonight is, or was, why did the lake get named for Florence's maiden name or middle name, which one is it, and not named Lake Florence, or Road Rock for that matter. Lake Irene, which was first called Reservation Lake according to the 1920 edition of Minnesota Geographic Names in Miltona Township, was named for Irene Roadruck, the daughter of Florence and Benjamin. When naming a child, if you're a parent, you know it's not always easy to agree upon a name. The same could be said when the pioneers were naming lakes. It could be said that a majority of our lakes are named for pioneer settlers in honor of their heritage, their homeland, or otherwise. It's interesting to note that the 28 townships I mentioned earlier within the County of Douglas, many of those townships have lakes with the same name. But of course, that is not the full pattern throughout in township naming or lake naming. The predominant lake in Hudson Township, for instance, is a maple lake, not Hudson. To my knowledge, there is not a Hudson Lake. However, the township was named by a pioneer woman who came from Hudson, Mrs. S.G. Childs, and according to the records written, she named it after Hudson, Wisconsin. The township was organized in 1869. It is said that the first pioneers from Sweden came to Douglas County and settled in Hudson Township. But it's also been said that Hudson had 4 different names before the name was finally agreed upon. First, in 1869, it was called Maple Lake Town, later shortened to Mapletown. Yet another name was Roslyn, but the pioneers finally settled on Hudson. As history is told by Lorraine Larson in her book, the real story is that Nels Olson took a claim on this lake and named it for the many maple trees around its shores. In 1966, Lorraine wrote that property owners still make maple syrup from those trees. So we have, love interests that didn't pan out. We have names of pioneer wives, husbands, mothers, fathers, children, businessmen, civic leaders, even bachelors. So let's look at a civic leader. Frederick von Bombach was born in Prussia in 1838 and died at his home in Alexandria in 1917. America with his father in 1848, served in the 5th and 35th Wisconsin regiments during the Civil War, attaining the rank of major, came to Minnesota, settling in Alexandria in 1867. He was auditor of Douglas County, Secretary of State in Minnesota 1880 to 1887, and Internal Revenue Collector for Minnesota in 1898 to 1914. Ever heard of Lake Minna? He named Lake Minna for his mother. However, there is also a Bombach Lake in Brandon Township, so he did slide that one in. Presumed family names of lakes throughout Douglas County include Elizabeth, William, Gilbert, and Rachel. Could the Lake William in Douglas County be named for William Kincaid? I found mention in the 1920 edition of Minnesota Geographic Names that Lake William was named for William the Conqueror. Holmes City Township is named for E.G. Holmes, who owned a trading post alongside Grants Lake. Grants Lake is named for Noah Grant, who settled in Holmes City in 1865. Blackwell Lake in Holmes City Township is named for George Blackwell. Van Loon Lake was named for Minor Van Loon in 1865. But if you looked at today's map, and by the way, I did bring some from the Public Works Building current maps. If you look at the current map, you will have a hard time finding Van Loon Lake, because they changed the name to Pocket. There are lakes named for John Freeborn, John Matson. There's a Grub Lake and the Lake Rachel, named for the Blackwell daughters in Holmes City Township, and Olaf Lake for Olaf Solgarten, who in 1893 lost his life in a farm accident. Lake Andrew in Lake Mary Township, south of Alexandria, was named for the first physician in Alexandria. So let's look at some more pioneer names. In Evansville Township, there's Jenny, there's Irwin, there's Alberts, there's Solberg, Hugh Hubbard, Davidson, Mala, and Fanny. I wonder, could this Fanny Lake be named after Fanny Cook of Alexandria? Is there a connection? It's debatable. Adjacent farmers commemorated by these names include George Irwin, Ole Alberts, A.H. Solberg, Oliver Hubbard, D.J. Davidson, and M.H. Mulla. By the way, the Davidson Lake, or Lake Davidson, is on the farm that my grandfather owned in Douglas County, but we never called it Lake Davidson, because my uncle lived on it, on the farm, and it was Morris. So it was Morris's Lake. So that brings to light for some families, maybe just decide to call it by their own family name, right? You can do this. Nobody else does, but we do. Where are you going? I'm going to Morris's Lake. So Nelson Lake, for O.W. Nelson, an adjoining farmer in Lake Cook in LeGrand Township, the last being in honor of Charles Cook, are some other pioneer names. There's in Brandon Township, there's Hunt, Stowe, Aldrich, and Nelson, who were pioneer settlers settling in that vicinity. There are several lakes in Ernest Township named for settlers: Amos Lake for Amos Johnson, Thorson Lake, Barsness Lake, Quam Lake, in Solom Township. Pioneer settlers were Eric Harrison Eng, Eric Heck, and John Rowland, for whom all those names are lake names. Solom Township takes its name from a district in Norway, from which place many of the pioneers came. Mole Township is kind of interesting. It has Thorstead Lake and Minister Lake, the last being near a Norwegian Lutheran church. Lake Vermont, back in Miltona Township, is named for settlers who came from the state of Vermont. Part of Lake Miltona is located in Leaf Valley Township, which has a spring lake and a Kelly Lake, the latter in honor of homesteader Patrick Kelly, an Irish settler. All of this information was gleaned once again from the 1920 edition of the book, Minnesota Geographic Names. Now, you heard of Lake Oscar, and you probably think, well, that certainly has to be named after a pioneer, for sure. Well, interestingly enough, the name of Lake Oscar in Home City Township, though a common christening name, was quite surely not adopted to honor any settler there, but for Oscar I, the King of Sweden and Norway in 1844 to 59, father of Oscar II, who was the king in 1872 to 1907. Similarly, Lake Christina in Lund Township and its companion, the large Pelican Lake in the adjoining corner of Grant County, appear through inaccurate outlines on an early map of Minnesota dated January 1860. Their names given as Lakes Christina and Eleonora. These were probably pioneer women, the first perhaps both being from Sweden. It could also be true that the first was bestowed in honor of Queen Christina, who was regent of Sweden in 1632 to 44 and queen during the next 10 years. So again, you be the judge, it's very debatable. Lake Victoria was first named on the old map as Skaka, spelled S-C-O-C-K-A, but was later named by Walter Scott Shotwell for the English Queen Victoria. He was the son of Daniel Shotwell, Walter was, from New Jersey, who homesteaded between Lakes Victoria and Geneva in 1859. Shotwell also renamed another lake. Today we know it as Lake Geneva, but Lake Geneva was first named Rowley on an old map. Later named Geneva by Shotwell for the resort town of Lake Geneva in Switzerland. Another name associated with royalty, again, we're back to the name William. Interestingly enough, part of what I was reading in the 1920 book about the name William, they kind of started talking about Orange Township here in Douglas County. And Orange Township was settled in 1863 and established as a township in 1868. Orange Township does not have a Lake William in it, but Orange Township is probably named for William the Conqueror or William Orange. So that gets kind of confusing a little bit, because I thought, well, now I have to look at the map and I've got to find Lake William in Orange County, because because it just would make sense, because Lake Orange Township has some William the Conqueror kind of history with it, so there obviously should be a lake by the same name, but there isn't. But there is a Lake William in Moe Township. On another note, research also shows that Orange Township was first called English Grove. And what about biblical names? Lund Township, the most northwestern township, has the large but shallow Lake Christina, which I mentioned earlier, and the small lakes Aka and Ina, bordering the south shore of that large lake, and Horseshoe Lake and Lake Cinna. The last, according to the 1920 plat book, bears on maps of the late 1800s the name Cinna. The name could come from Mount Sinai, called Cinna in the 7th chapter of the book of Acts. Again, I could not find a Lake Cinna on the current map. In Millerville Township, there are lakes named Moses, Aaron, and Aaron, named for the great Hebrew lawgiver and his brother, deliverers of their nation from Egyptian bondage and leaders toward the promised land of Palestine. There are a few lake names that I might have what I would call self-explanatory names. Let's start with Lover's Lake in Hudson Township. There's Crooks Lake. There's Whiskey Lake. And there's Devil's Lake. And they're all in Brandon Township. There is a mud lake, of which Lorraine Larson wrote, the name is obvious. There's Grassy Lake, and there are more than enough long lakes. There is Lake Venus, with the much larger Red Rock Lake. In Ernest Township, there is a wood lake said to have been named after a place in Vermont in Milcona Township. Other lakes are named for their trees, as I pointed out with Maple Lake earlier, and some for animals, such as wolf, elk, and turtle. Lobster Lake in LeGrand Township is named for its numerous arms or claws like the lobster, yet the meaning is more along the lines of its contour. This leads me to talk a little bit about lakes with names after their contours. There are 2 crooked lakes. There are some round lakes. There is a horseshoe lake, and like I said before, there's plenty of long lakes. They must have really been getting, running out of ideas at that point. Another lake in Home City Township, there's Echo Lake for its acoustics, but was formerly called Giles, most likely another homesteader. And of course, there are lakes named after Indian heritage, Osakas being one of the most prominent. There's a difference of opinion as to its meaning. Again, according to Lorraine Larson's book, a tribe of Sauk Indians camped near the outlet, and the name came from them. Another idea is that it comes from the Chippewa, Ossegan, or Azati. But according to Lorraine Larson in her book, there is a third opinion. There is a point on the lake where a fierce battle took place between 2 tribes. It is called Battle Point. The losing tribe sent up a great cry for help from the great spirit, shouting, "Osak, Sak," in their language. This means help, help. The largest lake in Brandon Township is Chippewa, and of course, named after the Chippewa, possibly also named because Brandon was first called Chippewa Station. And now let's take another one of the biggest mysteries that I've found in naming the lakes, and that would be Lake Latoka. Lorraine Larson wrote, always described it was called Pretty Lake, Lake Latoka, evidently an Indian name, one of the few Indian names in the county, when you think about it. In the 1920 Minnesota Geographical Names book, Lake Latoka was mentioned as, and I quote, name origin listed as yet to be ascertained. So that got me thinking. We know that Lake Latoka, we know that there's a rich Lakota history in this area. And its word Latoka has appeared on numerous maps, at least since 1879, as the name of the lake. But seemingly lacks any other history and has no apparent linguistic roots. I called the Minnesota Historical Society and asked them what their opinion was, and they said, They think it is a map-making error, which really kind of points out the importance of maps and map-making. I also found another article written by a gentleman by the name of Darwin Kasser, who he was really intrigued by it too, and he did some research in the year 2000 because his curiosity drove him to Lakota. Not only identifies the language dialect, but also is the name given to the sub-tribes who spoke the language. So he began some research at the Douglas County Library, and he did find Lorraine Larson's book. So he thought, well, now I can get the answer to this. But that was a false hope he wrote. The book had nothing explaining the meaning of the name Latoka, although the name of the lake was included. And so finally, in the fall of 2000, he visited the Douglas County Historical Society, and there he saw a map, copyright 1913, by the Minnesota Map Publishing Company. On that map, the name of our lake is clearly shown as Lake Lakota. I have so far made only one effort to find that company on the internet. Of course, after 89 years, it is unlikely the company even exists anymore. However, its records and documents could be archived somewhere, possibly the Minnesota Historical Society or the University of Minnesota. So you're not going to get a test tonight, but you are going to get an assignment, and that is to do some more research on Lake Latoka, and if you find anything out at all, because I haven't had time to pursue that another step further, I'd love to know. But this is pretty clear that if he saw a copyright 1913 Minnesota Map Publishing Company, then it's probably clear that thereafter it was a map maker's error. I just find that very interesting, you know, because I never really questioned it before, and I remember Lake Latoka when I was in high school. Of course, I didn't question a lot of things in high school, but that's another program. And now let's take a brief look at what the authors of Minnesota Geographic Names writes about our complex and recurring series or chain of lakes. Now, we have some chain of lakes that we're proud of, and I think we only basically talk most of the time about the 7 on the big chain, but really, we have much more than that. Okay, I'm going to just start in descending order. We have about 4 series of chains, and actually, when you think about it, all of our lakes either drain into the Sauk River or the Long Prairie River and go all the way down to the Mississippi and all the way down to the Gulf of Mexico. Anyway, so when you think that we're all connected anyway, that give yourself a pat on the back, because the Gulf of Mexico, we're doing our best to keep it clean, because our water is going down there. So, consisting of descending order, Lake Irene, earlier called Reservation Lake. This is one of our chains. Starts with Lake Irene, then goes to Miltona and Ida, respectively. Then Lakes Charlie and Louise, and then Union, where this series receives an important inflowing stream from another large series of lakes at the west and south. So now we're going to bring in Stone and Lottie Lakes, Lake Cowdrey, named for Samuel Cowdrey, pioneer farmer. And we're going to move on to Lake Darling, commemorative of Andrew Darling, a Swedish immigrant. And then on to Lake Carlos, which is the lowest lake in this series, or in descending order. And that has as deep as 150 feet deep. Lake Carlos. Ever wondered how Lake Carlos got its name? There's Lahamadou and there's Carlos. And they both were named by Glendy King, who was a friend of one of the Kincaid brothers from West Point. And he came here, and I don't know how he got permission to name 2 lakes, but he did it. And they were West Point grad friends, Carlos and Lahamadou. But if you say it correctly, and I was corrected by a French person, a Frenchman, it's Lahamadou. Got to roll, Lahamadou. So that's really, because I started talking about Lahamadou with these 2 French gentlemen, and they just started laughing. They said, what did you call it? And I said, Lahamadou. And they're like, boy, you got that one wrong. So we always can learn more as we meet people. Then there's another series of the chain, mentioned as a tributary to Union Lake of the preceding series. There's Lake Andrew, there's Lake Mary, Lake Minna, Berglund's Lake, and Fish Lake, once called Mill Lake, all attached by tributaries. Another series of lakes connected, well, to Lake Carlos includes Union Lake, Hudson, Bergens, and Victoria, Geneva, and Mahomet. We all know those. And then there's an eastern arm of Victoria in a fourth series, which is comprised by Lover's Lake, Child's Lake, and still another series of chain that are Brophy, named for the Brophy family, Union, Stony, and Taylor making up the acronym BUS. So maybe you've heard some of those smaller chains, not all of them. You can get from one lake to another, but some of them you can. It was Colonel Van Cleve, a political figure from Springfield, Illinois, an early member of the Missouri Club on Lake Miltona, who broached the first plan of how can we use these tributaries, these chains of lakes, so people can pass from one lake to another, because in the beginning, you know, that was kind of the dream, but how do you, since we've got these tributaries, how can we go from one lake to another and really promote tourism later and just travel, actually. So Van Cleve was the first person to approach that idea. And in 1878, the Alexandria Post-News encouraged businessmen to look after their lakes and encourage tourism by promoting channels, wider and deeper channels between the lakes that are connected by these tributaries. So the New Post-News in 1907 reported channels between the lakes to be made passable for launches. The Commercial Club Committee, having the matter in charge, are now completing arrangements for widening, deepening, and making permanent the channels between the lakes. Again, some good foresight by our pioneer, the businessmen and the pioneers before us. So what they did, a flat boat, 10 by 22 feet, is being constructed. A pile driver will be placed on this boat when it is finished, a 500-pound hammer having been ordered. Piling will be driven and well braced and planked on the outside to prevent sand from filling the channels. The channels will be made 20 feet wide and dredged out sufficiently to let the largest launches used here through. The channels will be carried far enough into the lake at each end to prevent the sandbar from forming. So that's how our large 7-lake chain began, with that initial channel, those initial channels. So they began with Darling the Carlos, Lahamadou, and the Lahamadou Geneva. Ever heard of the name Jack Mulvall? Alexandria Boat Works, he outlined a plan to create a big boat channel between the lakes and asked for cooperation from many community leaders. And the 1958 Park Region Echo reported Alexandria developers, the Alexandria Resort Association, and the Rotary Club volunteered to appoint representatives for their respective groups to promote this idea of mowboats. Mulvall said that boating was the hottest thing in the vacation industry, and that these tourist areas that planned to capitalize on the boom of boating would be the areas that would prosper the most. So transferring from the lakes could already be negotiated by smaller fishing boats, but widening and deepening them with Mulvall's idea, because motorized boating was going to be the next big thing. He got that project started. So wider channels were made. However, talk was of making Lake Miltona and Lake Irene and Ida included in those plans, but that never did materialize. So, moving on, I wanted to talk a little bit about maps before I end tonight and open it up to discussion and comments. You'll see that there's an old map here, which is not all of Douglas County, it's a few of the townships. If you go to the Douglas County Historical Society, the earliest plat map that they have is 1886, and you can start comparing if you wanted to do any further research on 1886 on up, 1920, and see how the maps have changed. And I mentioned Latoka, for instance, and how errors can be. But I think it's interesting to note that in today's current map, some lakes, bodies of water are not named at all. But some names have changed also. Some lakes have been drained, and that has happened in probably not 100% of all the 20 townships, but many of them. So if you start studying, in researching for tonight, just taking the 1921 or 2021 plat directory that we all get in the mail, just looking at the maps, which I think is a great idea in the directory, and how you can just really study maps. And studying maps really tells you a lot. And you can see the lakes names, and also if you know any of the history, you can also start saying, wait, I just looked at the 1886 map and I don't see the same layout. It really starts getting kind of interesting if you're into that kind of thing. So I encourage you to start, if you're interested, to study that a little bit. There is one township, and that is Bell River in Douglas County, once named Riverdale, that does have a long prairie river going through it, but it does not have a lake, really, so to speak. So I find that kind of interesting. Anyway, kind of want to summarize, according to Lorraine Larson's How the Lakes Were Named, again, Pocket Lake was named for its contour. It was first called Van Loon Lake. So somewhere along the line that got changed. I wish I could find information on how that got changed particularly, but it's now called Pocket. Other ones too that have been renamed. Back to the founders of Alexandria, the Kincaids. Lobster Lake was first called Kincaid Lake, according to Lorraine Larson's book. Mud Lake was listed as being in Carlos Township, and I see no indication of a mud lake in Carlos Township today. Just like Lake Latoka, Lake Alvin was mentioned in the 1920 publication. Where that name came from is yet to be ascertained, so that would be another assignment for you to find out. How did Lake Alvin get its name? Because I think when Arrowwood decided to name Antigua Golf Course, they were also going to try to change the name of the lake to Lake Antigua. So I remember that conversation with Jeff Wild. I said, oh, how does that work? You can just kind of change the name. But I see that on the map, it is still called Lake Alvin. So it's just kind of fun to look at all of these little tidbits of history. On another note, do you know how Arrowwood got its name? I just found this incredibly interesting because I always wondered, I kind of thought, well, we're not in the Arrowhead of Minnesota, so it's not that. Well, the name Arrowwood for the resort, I found this in an old newspaper article when Arrowwood was being built. And it was proposed by Les Blacklock, a noted photographer who came up here, who was a frequent guest of the Darling Ranch Resort, the location where today's resort now stands. And Arrowwood is a shrub that is in great abundance on the ranch property. You probably know that. So if you look around Arrowwood, and especially in the entrance there, these little branches, they're little sticks and they are straight as an arrow. And I just find that just fascinating that that's how Arrowwood got its name. And if you go out to Carlos State Park and do any of the trails, you'll find Arrowwood out there also. So in summary, spelling and name changes, we've kind of covered that. Lady Love, some lakes have no names. We have family names, pioneer names, ancestors' names, civic leaders, we've got doctors, we've got names that really kind of don't mean anything at all. Names that have been changed. We have lakes that have been drained. We have maps that have changed. Now the final question that I have, since we've solved all of this confusion, is how do we decide whether the word lake comes before the name or the name comes before the lake? So, Lake Carlos, Lake Louise, or Louise Lake, or Mud Lake, Lake Mud, there's Lake Moses and there's Moon Lake. there, you be the judge. What is your opinion on that? I'd be interested to know, because I just find this is just, you must think I have absolutely nothing else to do, the things I think of. But you ever given that any thought of how that all kind of, maybe it's the way it rolls off?
Say whatever sounds better, maybe.
Maybe it sounds better, rolls off the tongue. But
We're from Washington State, and they're all, they have the lake after the name, so it'd be like Rose Lake,
oh,
that sort of thing. Loon Lake, it's not.
okay.
Loon,
So the word lake comes after the name.
Out in the west it does.
Interesting.
Easier to alphabetize them if you do it at the end.
Say again.
It's easier to alphabetize them if you put it at the end.
Oh, that's a good point. Easier to alphabetize. I was just going to say they're just more, they just made decisions better or something. I don't know. We were just not able to make the decisions. It's just kind of a fun little, like, kind of makes you think, you know. So, anyway, I kind of just think it's a little bit random. But again, too, in conclusion, lakes and township names suggest a personal connection to history. I think that all of the lakes have some personal, some kind of connection to the pioneers, whether it was they named the lakes after a contour, an animal, a family name, of love, of whatever the case may be. You know, they did really, really well until they ran out of ideas and started naming everything long or round. But they did really a good job of keeping, you know, our legacy alive with names, and hopefully just with this fun little research I've done that you can leave here tonight, when you pass by a road sign that has the lake name, you kind of can think, well, I know I didn't by any means, there's 375 some lakes in Douglas County alone, and there's no way I could cover all of those without putting all of you to sleep, but we covered a few of the fun ones, I think. Any comments or questions?
In your studies, have you determined what characteristics a body of water has to have to be called a lake?
Yeah, it's a size and depth, you know, because there are a lot of sloughs.
Yeah.
And
You know what those numbers are?
I don't. Right, yeah, what they're surrounded by.
You can't be full of rushes all the way. They won't be called a lake.
Yeah.
There has to be big enough.
You want to say that?
My friend Paul says all the smart people live on Muhammad. Is that true?
That would just be kind of a folklore.
Tell us.
Oh, no, live there. Okay, because Lake Carlos, I know we're deep.
But they're
We're
smart
deep.
fellas.
Smart fellas?
Translate that to English?
They, you know what, that was a couple years ago. He wanted to know if the French translated that into English, and they did not. If they did, I forgot. Short-term memory.
Let me land man of
It
God.
means Jesus, because it's Lam Dieu. Dieu is God,
Okay.
and Lam is man. So it's
Man of God.
And
Man of God.
L-E is the, so it's the man, God.
Right. I think I might have that in some old notes now that I think about it, but thank you. I love that. I love that. I love that. That's great. Any other comments or information that I can get from you?
One question here. I don't remember what was the oldest map that you looked at to find names?
The oldest map would be 1886. That's a plat map of Douglas County Historical Society. And it's a big plat book, and that's the oldest map book I've studied.
How do you change the name of a lake?
Boy, that's a loaded question. I think that you probably have to go through a lot of government bureaucracy. I'm not sure, but I really don't know.
As opposed to Lake Como.
Like, Calhoun. Yeah, we all saw that. Or you can just do like my family and just call it what we want on our farm. So, and nobody needs to know.
Right.
Probably have to get a petition together of the people that own property on
I
the
think
lake.
you're right.
A certain percentage and go to the right people and see the right people.
Yeah, it wouldn't be an easy one-step thing. You'd have to start probably with a petition,
If it's like the taxing, you can set up taxing on a lake and have to have 70% of the people of the owners on the lake to be able to make a change like that.
Oh, okay.
There's an official number that you have to have.
Okay.
Except the lake itself is not owned by the landowners, it's public.
But it's a public, it's not a public, so you probably would have to start with
With
the,
changing the name of the street or road.
yeah, start with the petition and start with the paperwork.
Well, the other thing that's important about the lakes is that the DNR really has all the regulations of the lake. The people around the lake do not have any way of changing the lake. Like the Lake Association, you can't do any regulations. The DNR does all of that.
That's right, and land management too. It's
Right.
very important because we want to keep, we want to keep our lakes pristine and, the way that they were created. Absolutely. Thank goodness we do have those guidelines and those laws.
It's just kind of interesting here with people naming these lakes after kids and people they know, but over down there by Evansville, they have two long lakes within a couple miles from each other. How did that ever happen?
It's Evansville. What else can I say? I'm an Evansville graduate, high school graduate, and I would say we ran out of ideas. But I don't know.
They could have called them long
Maple lakes everywhere too.
I like that they should have called them long and longer, and then there could be a longest.
There's a maple lake that
Round and rounder. And longish. Yeah. You'd have to study, that is confusing. It is confusing. Any other comments? The important thing right now is just having some fun with it, but,
Well, I don't know if this is a late question, but how did like Pilgrim's Point and Government Point get named?
Government, I don't know about Pilgrim's Point so much, but Government Point got named because the land surveyor, they were doing a government surveying from east to west, and the surveyors named it as they were going down the lake, around the lake, and they named it Government Point. It was later called Boys Point when some of the early businessmen began